CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane is following this story for us. Welcome, Scott. So give us a preview of what we can expect today.
There will be votes midday on these criminal referrals, a unique moment in U.S. history, no matter one's perspective on this. A congressional panel recommending formal criminal charges against a former U.S. president. The charges expected to be voted on are obstruction of an official proceeding, conspiracy, and according to one committee member during the discussions he had this weekend, there's a possibility of a vote on incitement of an insurrection, which would be far and away the highest level charge levied against anybody for their role in the U.S. Capitol attack. Those votes happen midday. Then those recommendations move on to the U.S. Justice Department, but they are just that. They're recommendations. They're not binding on the Department of Justice, but the committee has been making the argument with us over the past week that their recommendations have a distinctive heft to them, a credibility to them because of the scope and size of the investigation this panel has launched. They've conducted more than 1,000 interviews. CBS News has learned they've collected more than 1 million records now, and they've done this for 18 months with witnesses at public hearings largely from the Trump inner circle or Republicans in general. They think this will infuse the referrals with a level of energy and credibility.
All right, and let's play some of what Congressman Adam Schiff said to CNN over the weekend.
In terms of the criminal statute, if you can prove that someone incited an insurrection, that is, they incited violence against the government, or they gave aid and comfort to those who did, that violates that law. And if you look at Donald Trump's acts and you match them up against the statute, it's a pretty good match.
And Scott, can you remind us how significant referring a former president for insurrection would be?
Well, the highest level charge so far for anybody attached to the U.S. Capitol attack is seditious conspiracy, a charge that you plotted to block the peaceful transfer of power in America. There have been 2 convictions at trial for defendants for seditious conspiracy. A few have pleaded guilty. Others face trial today on that charge. Incitement of an insurrection or giving an insurrection incitement or comfort or planning is another high-level charge that, again, nobody else from January 6th or the criminal cases faces, making this, in yet another way, a distinctive moment in American history, not only recommending a formal charge against a former president, but a charge of insurrection. We are going to see history play out today here on Capitol Hill.
And Scott, as you mentioned earlier, these criminal referrals are just recommendations to the Justice Department. Since they're not binding, what is the committee hoping to achieve?
To have something land with the Department of Justice. It's no secret the Department of Justice has undertaken an enormous investigation into January 6th. What's more, they've undertaken the largest investigation in U.S. Department of Justice history investigating January 6th. But there has been this latent concern for 2 years now that only the pawns on the chessboard have gone to trial or face prison time, that only those who actually were on the front lines of the riot have been prosecuted. There has been this unyielding call for higher level prosecutions. The Department of Justice is still doing its research, still doing its investigating, but the committee is hoping to give this a push towards a higher level defendant, ultimately, Tanya, the highest level defendant possible, the former president.
And Scott, you're on Capitol Hill. What's the response we're hearing from Republicans?
We expect a formal response from some number of Republicans either later today, later this week, or later this month. They have largely, almost exclusively boycotted this committee. There are only 2 Republicans on it, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, neither of whom will be back next Congress. House Republicans have called this politicized and a witch hunt. We expect them to counterpunch at some point in the coming days, but I've been speaking to a number of House Republicans who say next Congress, when they have the majority and the controls of the committees, not only are they getting rid of this January 6th committee, they plan to use their position on the Committee on House Administration to further investigate security failures at the Capitol January 6th, but also to investigate the operations of the January 6th committee itself, kind of an investigation into the investigators.
Interesting. And Scott, of course, with this meeting being televised, it begs the question, what effects could all of this have on public perception?
There is a growing sense, Tanya, that the 10 publicized, televised, nationally televised hearings they had in 2022 may have had a political influence on the midterm elections, where we saw election denier candidates lose overwhelmingly in close races in competitive states and competitive races. There's been some credit given to the January 6th committee for changing the politics or changing the view of voters. With this final nationally televised hearing, they have the potential to further change the political calculus in America. But all of this has created a higher hurdle for Donald Trump as he pursues running for the White House again in 2024.
Absolutely.
All right, Scott MacFarlane, thank you.